The heavy humidity of Manila enveloped the city like a suffocating blanket on that September night. Manny Pacquiao, the legendary world boxing champion, walked discreetly through the bustling streets of Quiapo district, wearing a simple cap and ordinary clothes to pass unnoticed. After an intense training session at Wild Card Gym, he had decided to take a solitary walk to clear his mind, something he rarely managed to do without being recognized. The lights from colorful jeepneys reflected in the puddles left by the afternoon rain, creating a kaleidoscope of colors on the uneven sidewalk. The smell of ballot and eyesore being sold by street vendors mixed with the sweet aroma of green mango with bagong. This was a Manila that Manny knew deeply, a city that pulsed with life even in the latest hours, where millions of stories intertwined in narrow alleys and wide avenues. In a dark alley near Quiapo Church, Manny noticed a hunched figure against the wall of an abandoned building. It was a thin man, probably in his 50s, with torn and dirty clothes that barely protected him from the night wind. His bare feet were injured, and he held with trembling hands a piece of cardboard where he had written with charcoal, "Haven't eaten today. Any help is a blessing." The boxer stopped, observing the man from afar. Something about that scene touched his heart deeply, perhaps because it reminded him of his own childhood in General Santos City, when he himself had gone hungry and slept on the streets. The memories of those difficult days never left him, even after achieving worldwide fame and fortune. Manny approached cautiously, noticing how the man kept his eyes down, ashamed of his situation. When their eyes finally met, Manny saw in the stranger's eyes a mixture of despair and wounded dignity. The man didn't recognize him, which somehow relieved the champion. Without saying a word, Manny took off his jacket and placed it over the man's shoulders, then withdrew some peso bills from his wallet and gently placed them in the stranger's calloused hands. The man looked up, surprised by the unexpected generosity, but before he could thank him, Manny had already walked away, disappearing into Manila's night crowd. 3 days later, at the luxurious Sofitel Philippine Plaza Hotel, a press conference awaited the arrival of one of the Philippines' most influential businessmen. Roberto Santiago, known as the Ghost of Business for his ability to operate behind the scenes without appearing publicly, was about to announce his return to the corporate world after a mysterious 6-month disappearance. The room was filled with journalists, executives, and curious onlookers, all eager to discover where the billionaire had been. What no one in the room knew was that Roberto Santiago was the same man Manny Pacquiao had encountered that night in Quiapo. 4 months, the businessman had lived a radical social experiment, inspired by a deep existential crisis. Tired of the falseness and superficiality of his social circle, Roberto decided to experience life on the streets, wanting to understand the true value of humanity when stripped of all power and wealth. The experience had been transformative and brutal. Roberto discovered society's cruel indifference toward the less fortunate, experienced real hunger for the first time in his privileged life, and witnessed acts of kindness and cruelty he had never imagined. For 6 months, he slept on sidewalks, searched for food in garbage bins, and was ignored by thousands of people who passed by him daily without even noticing. On that specific night in Quiapo, Roberto had reached his limit. After 3 days without eating anything substantial, his weak body could barely stand upright. It was then that the encounter with the stranger in the cap occurred. The jacket and money were enough for him to get a cheap room in a boarding house and a hot meal, but it was the gesture of genuine compassion that really marked him. The man hadn't asked anything, hadn't judged, just helped. Now, dressed in an impeccable Italian suit, with his hair cut and beard trimmed, Roberto Santiago looked like a completely different person. As he prepared to enter the conference room, he discreetly held the old jacket he had received that night. His assistants had tried to throw it away, but he insisted on keeping it, as a tangible reminder of a stranger's kindness. What Roberto didn't yet know was that his benefactor wasn't just any stranger, but one of the country's most famous athletes. Roberto Santiago began his presentation at the press conference with a shocking revelation. Instead of explaining his disappearance with conventional excuses about health problems or secret travels, he confessed to having lived as a homeless person on the streets of Manila. The room fell into absolute silence as he described his experiences, from devastating hunger to the social invisibility he experienced. Journalists exchanged incredulous looks, some doubting the veracity of his words. The businessman then surprised everyone by announcing that he would dedicate half of his fortune, estimated in billions of pesos, to create a foundation aimed at helping Manila's homeless. But there was a condition. He first needed to find the person who had restored his faith in humanity that night in Quiapo. Roberto showed the worn jacket to the cameras, explaining that this simple gesture of kindness had saved not only his hungry body but also his disillusioned soul. Immediately, a task force was assembled. Private detectives were hired, security cameras from the area were analyzed, and a substantial reward was offered to anyone who could identify the mysterious benefactor. Roberto appeared on all major television programs, always holding the jacket and recounting the story of that night. He described the man as someone of medium height, wearing a simple cap, with strong, calloused hands that suggested manual labor. Meanwhile, Manny Pacquiao watched the news from his home in General Santos City, preparing for his next fight. He immediately recognized the jacket and the story but remained silent. He hadn't helped that man for recognition or reward. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. His wife Jean Key noticed his restlessness as they watched the coverage, but Manny just smiled and changed the channel. Roberto's search became a national obsession. Television programs created special segments about the savior of Quiapo, and social media buzzed with theories and guesses. Some suggested it might have been a priest, others bet on a night worker, but no one suspected that the benefactor could be a world celebrity. Roberto, determined to find his savior, began frequenting the Quiapo area every night, hoping fate would reunite them again. Weeks had passed since Roberto Santiago had begun his public search for the man who had helped him. The story had captured the imagination of the entire country, transforming into a symbol of hope and kindness in difficult times. Meanwhile, Manny Pacquiao was preparing for a charity fight at the Araneta Coliseum, with all proceeds going to feeding programs for needy children. It was another of the champion's many philanthropic initiatives, who always maintained a strong connection with his humble roots. On the night of the event, the Araneta Coliseum was packed. Among the VIP spectators, Roberto Santiago occupied a place of prominence, still carrying with him the jacket that had become his talisman. He had been personally invited by Pacquiao to the event, although the two had never formally met. Roberto accepted the invitation, hoping that, at an event of this magnitude, he might find clues about his benefactor or even mobilize more people for his search. During the opening ceremony, Manny climbed into the ring to give a speech about the importance of helping those in need. He spoke about his own childhood, about the nights he went to bed hungry, and about how the kindness of strangers had changed his life. As he spoke, his eyes met Roberto's in the front row, and for a brief moment, there was a flash of mutual recognition. Roberto felt his heart race. Something about that look seemed familiar. It was then that Manny did something unexpected. He mentioned a recent story about a businessman who had lived on the streets and was now looking for someone who had helped him. The boxer paused, looking directly at Roberto, and said that acts of kindness shouldn't be done for recognition, but because they were necessary. He then revealed that he knew the identity of the man Roberto was looking for, because he himself was that man. Silence took over the stadium. Roberto slowly stood up, holding the jacket with trembling hands. The two men stared at each other across the distance, one in the ring and the other in the audience, united by a moment of compassion that had occurred on a dark night in Quiapo. The cameras captured the moment when full recognition hit Roberto. The calloused hands he remembered were the same ones that had knocked out world champions, and the humble man who had shared his jacket was one of the world's most celebrated athletes. The moment of revelation at the Araneta Coliseum created a wave of emotion that swept through the entire stadium. Roberto Santiago, still holding the jacket he had treasured, slowly walked toward the ring, with tears silently streaming down his face. The security guards, understanding the importance of the moment, cleared the way for him to climb the stairs leading to the platform where Manny Pacquiao waited. When they finally stood face to face, the contrast between the two men was notable. The businessman in his impeccable suit and the boxer in his sports attire. But in that moment, all social and economic differences disappeared. Roberto extended the jacket to Manny, who took it with a gentle smile, immediately recognizing the piece of clothing he had taken from his own shoulders that cold night. Manny then did something that surprised everyone. He put the jacket on again and embraced Roberto. It was a long and sincere embrace, two men who had experienced poverty in different ways, one by necessity, the other by choice, united by mutual understanding of human suffering. The stadium exploded in applause and tears, while cameras recorded every second of this extraordinary meeting. Roberto, still emotional, took the microphone and shared with the crowd how that simple act of kindness had transformed not only that terrible night but his entire perspective on life. He revealed that during his months on the streets, he had been ignored, mistreated, and even assaulted, but it was the compassion of a stranger, who he now discovered was Manny Pacquiao, that prevented him from completely losing faith in humanity. The businessman then announced, right there in the ring, that his new foundation would be established in partnership with Pacquiao's charitable initiatives. Together, they would create an unprecedented support network for Manila's homeless, combining Roberto's financial resources with Manny's influence and generous heart. The crowd witnessed not just the reunion of two men, but the birth of a powerful alliance dedicated to transforming lives. In the months following the emotional reunion at the Araneta Coliseum, Manila witnessed a gradual but significant transformation. The Pacquiao-Santiago Foundation, as it was named, began its operations with a shelter center in the heart of Quiapo, exactly at the location where the two men had first met. The abandoned building where Roberto had taken refuge that night was completely renovated, transforming into a modern social assistance complex. Manny and Roberto worked side by side, regularly visiting the center and actively participating in the programs. The boxer brought his life experience and his genuine connection with the people, while the businessman contributed his management expertise and his vast network of corporate contacts. Together, they created an innovative model that not only offered shelter and food, but also professional training programs and psychological support. The story of their encounter became legendary in the Philippines, inspiring an unprecedented wave of solidarity. Other businessmen, touched by Roberto's example, began contributing resources and expertise. Celebrities and athletes followed Manny's example, dedicating time and resources to social causes. What began as an isolated act of kindness had multiplied into thousands of similar gestures throughout the country. Roberto, transformed by his experience, became a different businessman. He implemented more humane policies in his companies, increased minimum wages, and created assistance programs for employees in difficulties. His leadership became a model for Filipino entrepreneurship, proving that business success and social responsibility could walk together. He kept the old jacket in his office, hung in a glass frame, as a constant reminder of his journey. Manny, in turn, found in the partnership with Roberto a way to amplify his social impact. His victories in the ring gained even greater meaning, as each charity fight raised substantial funds for the foundation. He often shared in interviews how that night in Quiapo had reaffirmed his belief that true champions are measured not by their titles, but by their ability to lift others up. A year after the encounter that changed their lives, Manny Pacquiao and Roberto Santiago inaugurated the foundation's 10th shelter center, this time in Mindanao, the boxer's homeland. The event brought together thousands of people, including former homeless individuals who had rebuilt their lives through the foundation's programs. Among them was Miguel, a former engineer who had lost everything due to addiction, but now coordinated the foundation's technical training programs. During the ceremony, Roberto took the stage wearing, for the first time in public, simple clothes similar to those he had worn during his period on the streets. He explained that he did this periodically to never forget the lessons learned during those difficult months. By his side, Manny smiled, proud to see how a spontaneous gesture of kindness had flourished into a national movement of social transformation. The foundation had already helped more than 5,000 people get off the streets, offering not just emergency assistance, but sustainable paths to rebuilding lives. The model created by Manny and Roberto was being studied by international organizations and replicated in other Southeast Asian countries. Filipino universities began including the case in their administration and social work curricula, using it as an example of social innovation and cross-sector partnership. Manny Pacquiao and Roberto's wife, Isabella Santiago, also became deeply involved in the project, creating specific programs for women and children living on the streets. They organized fundraising events that united the Filipino elite and program beneficiaries, breaking social barriers and creating bridges of mutual understanding. The transformation wasn't just of those assisted, but of all Filipino society, which began to see poverty and inequality from a new perspective. International impact soon followed. Manny was invited to speak at the UN about the project, while Roberto participated in global economic forums, sharing his radical experience and learnings. Documentaries were produced, books were written, but both always emphasized that the real story wasn't about them, but about the transformative power of human compassion when put into action. 5 years had passed since that fateful night in Quiapo. The Pacquiao-Santiago Foundation had become one of Asia's most respected social organizations, with centers in all major Philippine cities and pilot projects in neighboring countries. Manny Pacquiao, now retired from boxing, dedicated himself entirely to social and political work, using his influence to promote public policies to combat poverty. Roberto Santiago had transformed his business empire into a model of conscious capitalism, proving that profit and purpose could coexist harmoniously. On a special September night, exactly 5 years after their first encounter, Manny and Roberto returned to the original location in Quiapo. The dark alley had been transformed into an illuminated plaza, with the foundation's first center shining like a beacon of hope. They walked together on the same sidewalks where they had crossed paths as strangers, now as brothers united by a greater purpose. During the walk, they encountered a young man huddled in a corner, holding a sign similar to the one Roberto had used years before. Without hesitation, both approached. Manny took off his coat, not an old jacket, but a new, warm garment, and placed it over the boy's shoulders. Roberto knelt beside him, offering not just money but a card from the shelter center and the promise of real, lasting help. The young man, named Paolo, was only 19 years old and had fled from an abusive family situation. His eyes, initially distrustful, shone with hope when Manny and Roberto sat beside him on the sidewalk, listening to his story without judgment. They didn't introduce themselves as celebrities or businessmen, just as two men who understood his pain and wanted to help. Paolo had no idea who his benefactors were, just as Roberto hadn't recognized Manny 5 years earlier. As they accompanied Paolo to the shelter center, Manny and Roberto exchanged a meaningful look. The circle had been completed, but the story continued. Each act of kindness created waves that expanded infinitely, touching lives in ways they could never imagine. The original jacket, now framed at the entrance of the first center, had become a symbol not of charity, but of human dignity and the transformative potential that exists in every gesture of genuine compassion. The dark night of Quiapo had given way to a new dawn of hope for thousands of Filipinos, proving that sometimes the greatest miracles begin with the smallest gestures. If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.